Hey everybody, we're back with day 2 of finishing this UFO. So in the last video we worked on the middle and finishing the bottom end of the quilting. But today we're going to work on the other end of the quilt and finish that quilting off, and then we're going to plan out our border design. So yesterday when I was quilting, I was struggling with all the bulk of the quilt, especially when we were working on going in opposite directions. The first pass would have no bulk, the next pass would have loads of bulk. So I'm going to roll up the end of the quilt into a noodle or a sausage, just to make managing the bulk a little bit easier in the throat space. There we go. So, you can see I've rolled it into a big sausage. Okay, so just a reminder, we're using a quilting stitch on the Bernina with a 3.5 thread width, and we're just doing a combination of stitching in the ditch and straight line quilting backwards and forwards. I do have an existing design drawn on that I was planning to do in chalk that I'm not doing. So we're just using that as a guide, and we're leaving long tails on the top and bottom to make it easier to tie off and hide the knots. So you can see with the noodle, it's much easier to feed this through the throat space. It's much more manageable, and you actually can use it as a bit of a handle to feed it through, which is great. So whilst I'm taking the safety pin out, I'll just let you know as well, I was having difficulty finding this red fabric for the binding, and I had mentioned it because I had actually started this so long ago, when I actually checked, and it was November 2014 that I ordered the fabric for this. So that's 6 years, almost 6 years that I've had this fabric. So I was thinking there was probably very little chance of actually being able to get this fabric. However, it's actually a makeover, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but makeover fabric. I managed to find, because I never seem to clear out my emails, the order confirmation of when I ordered this fabric. Port is this red colour, so it's port, mocha and cappuccino with the 3 colours. So I actually will be able to get the matching red to do the binding, which is great. And we'll have another video about how measuring and working out how much fabric for binding, because that's another area that I always used to make mistakes and then end up with either miles too much or just not quite enough. But anyway, so just a reminder as well with this quilting, what we're doing is we're starting one spot and working this way, and then we're working back the way to avoid any puckering. And we want to make sure I'm starting in the ditch, which you can't see very well. There we go. Oh, and I still can't find my quilting book. This last one has all the weight on the other side, because actually, whilst that noodle gets rid of all the bulk, I actually don't like sewing with that. I think it's quite irritating. I prefer to have it just all over the place like I had it last time. So that's the main bulk of the quilting done. Just straight lines, probably not the most imaginative in the world, but it's certainly a lot better than what I had planned, which was far too complex and would have taken years to sew. So when it comes to this border, we've got a couple of choices. We have a straight line down here, so we could just mirror one here in the middle, and then we could stitch in the ditch along the lines, and that would give us a nice border. Simple but easy. Or the other thing we could do is to do squares on point, which would give us a kind of diamond look going down. So this would be nice, and we would just sew in zigzags going this way first and then coming back that way, and that would create that checkered effect. But the problem we have is, how do we finish the corners? If you imagine this is the corner here, there's a square in the corner. So you have your last square on point finishing here, so then what do you do in the corners to get round? So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep it simple and easy. I'm going to echo this line here in the middle of the border, and then we're going to stitch down here. I can put the needle all the way across, and I can have a line that's just about ½ an inch away, and then I can do another ½ an inch line, and then I can do it along here. So I think we're going to do that, and what we're going to do is work it so that it's a continuous line round, so it's a square, or actually in this case a rectangle. So let's figure out from this edge, so we're ½ an inch from the edge. So what we need to make sure is that we get this right for the corner so that it doesn't look stupid. So what I'm going to do is on the diagonal, so this is the diagonal here, and we want them to meet up like this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to measure ½ an inch along the diagonal line and put a little mark. And what we'll do is when I come, I'll sew to that line, and then I pivot and carry on to that line. So we're just going to mark a ½ inch mark on every diagonal corner. All these tails that need to be hidden. So what I'm actually doing is, because we're going to echo the lines every ½ inch, we'll have our first line, and then our second line, and then our third line. So we actually need to make sure we have enough lines on this corner so that we can join them all up, and I can already see for some reason that that doesn't match. But these are nice and easy to sew, it's just a very long straight seam. So as I said, we're going to mark a ½ inch, and then an inch, and then an inch and a half, and then 2 inches. That gives us 4 marks to sew from. So we're going to start in this corner that's wonky, because that will help us to get it right. So what I'm looking for is my chalk mark. There we are, and we're just going to take it nice and easy. And all I'm doing is I'm keeping the edge of the pressure foot down this line, and I've moved the needle across to the right so that I can get a ½ inch. So coming up to the corner, we're going to sew up to the diagonal line, and this will make sure that when we then sew in the opposite direction, lines match up. So when the needle hits the diagonal seam, I'm going to stop. And one more stitch. Perfect. So press the foot up, and just going to pivot the quilt around. You can see my nice line here, keeping all my tails out of the way, and off we go. So our bobbin is flashing at us to tell us that it's running out of thread, so all these long tails have taken their toll, and we're not going to be able to do this in one continuous seam. We're going to have to cut thread and refill the bobbin. So I'm going to try and make it to the corner if I can, because then I can hide it in the seam. So fingers crossed there's enough thread to make it to the corner. There's a little bit of puckering in the fabric, so I'm just letting the jewel feet pull that. And we're right in the corner, so we're going to have to cut thread here and refill the bobbin, which is really annoying. Just a good thing about these machines is that they flash and tell you when they're running out. The bobbin's about to run out, but let's see how much thread's left in it. You can see there's actually quite a lot of thread left in that bobbin, so we might have just made it to the end of the seam, but nothing we can do with cut thread, so we just have to pull this off and refill it. jack, so there wasn't as much thread as I thought on there. It was just the seam that wouldn't have gone. That would have stopped halfway down the long seam. So these are the Bernina 9, I think it's Bernina 9 bobbins, so they take a lot of thread. Oh, it's a daisy. Happily, and this is an integrated cutter for chopping that off. And thankfully, because I'm using a different thread, I didn't have to unthread the needle. So I'm just pulling up the bobbins there, giving myself a nice long tail to hide in the seam. And I'm going to pick up where we left off. So ideally what I should have done is I should have checked how much thread was in my bobbin before I started doing this long seam. But what you gonna do? Be more organised in future, I guess, is the answer to that. This is the point where we cross our fingers and hope that we haven't meandered too far and it matches up. Oh, look at that. We're just right on it, that's perfect. And what I'm going to do is, rather than starting every seam in the same corner, I'm going to start one seam in one corner, one seam in the next corner, the third seam in the next corner, and then the last seam in the last corner, so that the start and stop points are split up. So we're at the corner, and this is the wonky corner from before, and I can tell it's wonky because I can see that the seams are not matching on the miter. Instead of being a nice right angle, it's almost like a shirt collar point here. So when we're finished quilting, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to trim this down to make it square. So that's the perils of doing miter corners when I wasn't that experienced and didn't understand that fabric stretches. We're coming back up to where we started, so making sure the tails are out of the way. Just going to slow down a bit to try and make sure that it definitely lines up as much as we possibly can. Again, I can see that this corner of the miters, even though the seam matches, this fabric's been stretched because it's not a perfect square. Perfect. So when it's not a perfect square, that makes it quite difficult to do straight line quilting because obviously you're echoing a line that's not straight. We started in this corner, so we're going to flip round, so this is our third line. Okay, so we're done. So you can see this is my echo lined quilting. You can see where the lines wobble a little bit, and you can see this lovely ball of threads that need to be hidden. I think that looks pretty good. You can see a little bit how that corner is not matching. It's not actually bad, there is one that's worse. You can see how it's just stretching. So the question is now, what do we do with this? I think doing straight lines all the way down is going to be too much. So we could maybe try and introduce something in the opposite direction to add some movement. I don't want to do any free motion quilting. I want to try and keep straight line quilting if I can, because it's going to be faster and quicker, and free motion quilting is honestly not my favourite thing in the world to do. I actually will prefer to do just straight line walking book stuff if I can get away with it. So I'm going to go and do some Googling and Instagramming to see some ideas for this, and we'll come back.